everybody to the race briefing for the Osmotech Alderney race kicking off at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon tomorrow. So thanks very much to Osmotech for sponsoring. As a jog member, you can get a 10% discount off Osmotech. So Osmotech are sort of a boat servicing company, for want of a better expression. Next year, for category 3 life raft races, we'll need to do keel inspections. So Osmotech do a deal on keel inspections, which is worth looking into. As well as being a jog member, you can also get a 20% discount on Predict Wind as well. Both members' benefits are available from the members' benefits page on the jog website. Also, Osmotech invite everybody to a drinks reception at 5 o'clock on Saturday at the Alderney Sailing Club, which should be really good because for once, I think we're going to get there in really good time, be able to have a good sleep before we all have to go for a drink, which I'm really looking forward to after the last few races. So making the start, looking at the weather at the Synoptic scale. So tomorrow, what we have is a low pressure system currently situated south of Iceland and to the northwest of Ireland and northern England. And that's going to be pushing in, as you can see here. It's going to be displacing a high pressure system that has existed sort of between Spain, Portugal and southern England, but it's been extended that way, which will bring us some decent wind. There's also this low pressure system here as well, pushing in at the same time. Because of the presence of the high, it's slightly unpredictable, I think, what the wind direction will be earlier in the day. I think perhaps we might have a better idea tomorrow morning with the latest sort of 0700 UTC forecast will give us a better idea of how this high and low pressure system might interact. But there's a potential that we might have more southerly winds than we're going to be talking about during this briefing if the high and the low behave unpredictably. So earlier when I was looking at the forecast today, there was an occluded front, which we can just see here now as I push the scroller forward, passing over southern England and France. That was going to bring, before the front, we had sort of westerly winds, maybe, southwesterly winds. And then as the occluded front passed, it was becoming more westerly. It's likely that occluded front is going to bring gusts, seeing the highest average wind speed looking at about 20 knots with potential gusts up to 30. However, that's at the higher resolution, so that was 100 kilometers. We look at the slightly better quality resolution at 50k for UKMO model. I think that's showing the frontal system passing sooner, so we may not actually see that because we'd expect the 50k model to be slightly more accurate than the 100k model. So with the situation with the passing front, we're looking, I think initially winds are going to be southwest, then veering to the west, and then they're going to peak, I think, about somewhere between 6 and 8 o'clock in the evening. We'll get peak winds of around 20, 22 knots perhaps, and then it's going to die off during the night. As we move further south, the wind should get lighter as well, because we've got this spacey area of pretty slack pressure over sort of the Brittany part of the coastline here. With that passing front, potential for quite a lot of rain and potentially poor visibility as well. But as I said, it's looking like that may pass before we actually get on the race course. In terms of air temperature, it's not particularly warm, seeing 12 to 13 degrees, and sea temperature is about 12 degrees as well. Just to check, there's a quick question. First, thank you, Martin. Thank you, Martin, for your comment. Now, just looking at the route, so usual start, east to west. Please remember to go through the identity gate showing your sail number before we get started. Heading down the Western Solent, obviously shallow water on the island side. If you go further north, there's shallow water on the mainland side as well, and then deep water in the middle, as we all know. As we say in practically every briefing, the strongest tide down here is around Sconce, and then on the north side of it, the Needles Channel. The course is leaving the Isle of Wight and all obstructions on our port side. So I've just set the waypoint just outside the slightly shallower bank. It's for everybody to make their decision about where they want to to pass that. Then out into the English Channel and for the long leg to Alderney, finishing between the end of the breakwater, and there's a blockhouse on Roselle Point, and it's the line between the two, that is the finish line. There should be a finishing team on station. However, my projection is most people are going to be finishing somewhere between 4 and 6 in the morning. So I think we should all take our own times as well, just in case anybody's missed for whatever reason, in case it's dark. There's only one real navigational issue to be aware of. You have the off-Casquette TSS, so you can expect lots of shipping heading east and west here. Just keep an eye out for it, really. Just on the start line, so as usual, listen on channel M1 37A, and then the finish line. If you are the leading yacht, please text the race officer or call Jog 1 on VHF 72. And with that, I'll hand over to Will for the leg reviews.
Thank you very much. So this is going to be a little bit of a change from all the last ones we've done, because there's a fairly locked in solid forecast to talk about. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be quite a sort of different experience. So I'll start with the start. For all classes, the tide will have turned across the whole course to go with. So it should be westerly tide with the whole way down the Solent. So it's just a question of staying in the tide down the middle of the Solent and then tacking on the shifts. I'm expecting it to be quite shifty as it comes out of the front with the complicated weather patterns. So keeping an eye on track, standard tactics, but keeping a track on headers, lifts, tacking on the shifts while staying in the tide. And I imagine most people on the call have done multiple beats in a southwesterly 50 to 20 down the western Solent, so I'm not going to talk much more about that one. The one thing I will sort of flag with the 4 o'clock start time and the peak winds 6 till 8, it goes back to the old classic advice. If you're getting towards Hurst and you think you need a reef or a smaller jib, do it before you get there, because it will inevitably be windier through the gap and once you get out into the Solent. So if you're on the edge for however your sails are set through sort of in the run up to Hurst off Lymington, make the change early, because it's much easier to go back once the wind goes through. So on the leg across to Alderney, it's quite an interesting one, because if you look at the routings, which are just running in the background, but as the sort of week's gone on, or so the latest set have a lot less port tack in them to get across west. I think there's a big split here, or certainly in my mind, there's a bit of a split between the smaller boats and the faster boats. So I'll start with the faster, bigger end. If you have to put a port tack to go west in, you want to do it early. So you want to do it in the north half of the Solent, north half of the channel, when the wind is strongest and before we're expecting, as the course goes on, a shift to the west. So you'll be tacking, you'll get on the correct side of the shift. The challenge is knowing at that point, judging how much port tack and westing you need to put in. And you can see a few of the routings on the screen have little legs. Knowing when and where how much to put in is going to be a very difficult judgment call. And it's also dramatically affected by how fast or slow you are going to the models. So if you're going to get across the channel faster than predicted, you need more westing, because you'll have a lot less west going tide. Which brings me on to the smaller boats, who need less westing early, because as they get towards Alderney, they'll have more positive tide, and specifically they'll have more positive, stronger tide, where it runs strongest around the Cherbourg Peninsula, pushing them west. So I think there's going to be a key decision point off the island, sort of about where the boat is there, shown on the routing, as to whether you put any leg west in there. Because the downside is, if you go west there, say you put 10 miles in and you end up overstood for Alderney, you've sailed extra distance compared to people who've just gone out, put it on starboard tack and sailed across the channel. So I think that, in my mind, that judgment call there as to how much westing, if any, to put in is going to be probably one of the key sort of critical factors for the race. And the other thing to sort of bear in mind when looking at all the routings and the forecasts and things, from a racing point of view, a 10-degree shift, a 10-degree header or lift as you come in for the last 3 hours is nothing in terms of forecast models, accuracies, and things like that. But in terms of laying the finish and making the right tactical call, could be the difference between first and last, because that over 3 hours, that 10 degrees could add up dramatically. So it's going to be quite an interesting one as we see what the weather does. I think the only other thing worth highlighting is from a more sail trim boat speed perspective is near the end as it goes light, we're going to still have a bit of the swell. If you look, when I was looking at lunchtime, it was still even later in the day predicting sort of 1 meter style waves. So that's going to be a sort of boat speed challenge to keep the boats when the winds drop down to the sort of 10 to 15, but you've still got a meter swell running. That's going to be quite an interesting challenge to keep the boats moving, certainly near the end. And then, yeah, so that's everything I had on my notes. Back to you, Will.
Thanks, Will. So I thought, since for once the forecasts have done us a favour and they're giving us some wind, we could run some different routing models like we did on our first briefing. So this model here is a J120, so it's obviously a faster boat in the class 1. And as you can see, there's a couple of routings so putting in very small dog legs. And personally, for me, I'd look at those routings and go, a dog leg that size really isn't worth bothering with. I'd just sail the rum line. Although I think the model has fallen down somewhat when you get down towards the finish. It appears the boats are almost sailing dead upwind on that final leg. But ultimately, we need to sail in real life and not what the routing says. And I would just sail the rum line as best I could, allowing for wind and tide at my boat speed to get there. If we run the routing for a small boat in the fleet, Alderney Express, and see what happens there. Now, what I think we're likely to see is obviously because the boat's somewhat slower, it's going to be more affected by the tide. So you see slightly larger bowing out on the east-going tide, but then you obviously have a longer period of being pushed west. So it's not really a huge issue. And so the Alderney Express is looking like it's going to be finishing about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. And I think what can all give us a bit of confidence is that all the models are relatively well aligned. They're all finishing about the same time, despite the fact some of them are throwing in some fairly odd dog legs, in my opinion. My personal strategy is probably just to hit the end of the needles and just head as best course you can to the finish, shaping a course to steer for the tide over the next sort of 8 hours or so. Got a question in the Q&A from Will's dad. Might want to mention having fuel for the trip home. Yeah, so looking at the weather on the way home, we can have a look at that. So what's quite interesting about the weather this weekend is we're actually going to have a great sail across on Friday night, which is good. And then Saturday, it looks pretty quiet. I mean, really, really quiet. Potentially, if the wind does something unexpected, we might actually have quite a quiet finish if this lighter airs comes in earlier than expected. But into Sunday, it's looking much of a muchness, to be honest. I think the forecast model for the UKMO is just updated in the last sort of hour or so, because I was looking at this earlier, and it had quite a nice breeze from sort of west-southwest to get us home. But now it's looking, frankly, all over the place. And so, to me, I'd be thinking about most sailing potentially, especially if I left early, although later on in the afternoon, it does look like it might fill in, although maybe towards evening time. Can you still get fuel in Bray? That is a good question. I don't have an immediate answer. I'd suggest Googling Alderney Harbour. You could give them a ring tomorrow morning as well. But I think personally, from my experience, it's much easier just to have enough fuel to get you there and get you back, and then you don't have to worry about it. I do remember filling up in Bray Harbour before, and it is tidally dependent as well. So it may not suit you to fill up with the tide and when you want to leave. So personally, it might be easy just to carry the fuel with you if you have the capacity. Any other questions? Anybody like a particular boat routed? Very happy to route some boats now that we have some good wind for once.
I think just while we're waiting for any input on that, I think the only other thing worth mentioning is we have the next Clean Sailors webinar on, is it Tuesday the 24th, Will?
I think we're probably going to reschedule just because the Clean Sailors guys have been managing their race team, and they say they're quite knackered. So we're likely to reschedule for another day.
Okay, apologies, I hadn't got that message.
That's all right. Another question. When leaving, look at the northern element of a tide, which is okay. So 1 a.m. Will, do you want to answer that one?
No, it's just, yeah, I think this sort of ties in more on the big strategy picture, both trip down and trip there. Is it's quite easy. You think about the tide in the channel is always east-west in most people's heads. When you get down to the Alderney race, the Cherbourg Peninsula, etc., it's always worth bearing in mind it runs a lot more southwest, northeast, in sort of on both the approach and for the trip home. So it's just always worth bearing in mind that. We're personally leaving at 1 in the morning on Sunday morning, which is going to be early, but each to their own for their trips home.
Yeah. So we'll just run through a couple of highlights from the sailing instructions. So just a quick reminder. So
just an answer on the fuel from Martin, who I'm assuming is there, but fuel's available in cans from the local garage. Inner harbour fuel only accessible with enough tide. That's the answer. Sorry, cool. Back to you.
So sailing instruction highlights. So don't forget the drinks party at the Alderney Sailing Club at 5 o'clock on Saturday. For anyone who's not been there before, it's literally you get the water taxi ashore and it's almost immediately in front of you. You can't really miss it. Been there lots of times. They're all very friendly and it's a great place to have a drink as well. If you do have to retire for any reason, please contact the race officer by mobile or VHF, either M137A or channel 72 if you're towards Alderney. Realistically, I think mobile is much easier than radio. Don't forget to take your ship's papers and passports with you. Although we like to think of Alderney as just being an extension of the UK, it's its own jurisdiction and we do need to follow some formalities. These include submitting the UK departure and arrival forms. If you went on the Cherbourg race, you'll be familiar with the process, submitting a departure form to the UK and then an arrival form when you come back. And also you just need to fly flag Quebec, which is the yellow quarantine flag, on your arrival in Alderney. And there'll probably be some paperwork to do on the Alderney side as well. But last time I went there, you could fill it in on arrival. You don't need to submit anything beforehand. Another question in the Q&A. Water taxi is cash only, according to Martin. So everybody make sure you bring some cash. In the sailing instructions, it does tell you when the water taxi runs from memory. I think it's 7 a.m. to midnight. Obviously, don't miss the water taxi on your way home if you're having a few beers, because you're not going to have a very pleasant evening ashore in Alderney with nowhere to go. Any other questions? Happy to answer anything that comes along. No, well, if there's nothing more to add, Will and I will stick around for a few more minutes and answer any questions that do pop up. But otherwise, please go and enjoy your Thursday evening. And we look forward to seeing you all in Alderney on Saturday morning and afternoon. Thank you. How was your trip back, Will, from Weymouth? Quite windy, wasn't it?
Lumpy.
Yeah. What time do you get to Lymington?
Sort of just before lunchtime, 11-ish.
Did you go via North Head?
No, we got in just as the tide, with just the tide under.
Oh, right. Nice.
We did leave at 5 in the morning for that. So.
Yeah, we were like half an hour behind you, but obviously slower. And so ended up going through the North Head, which was quite exciting. We picked up the back eddy at one point and couldn't stay in it, and then had to motor through it like a knot over the ground.
Yeah, it'd be a more pleasant delivery home, hopefully this weekend.
Yeah.
Motoring in,
it was good. We saw like 30 knot gusts on our way back.
Yeah.
So full main, little jib, was fine.
Oh, we motored home.
Did you? What, all the way?
Yeah.
For all that lumpiness?
Yeah.
You probably sailed quicker. You
Oh, I
tried.
don't know. They didn't wake me up, so I slept most of it. So yeah. Well, it's gonna be interesting to trip out. It's first windy channel crossing in a while.
Yeah, we're good.
Last year was generally pretty light as well.
I'm hoping, because what's interesting, right, on all the routings, so this is a 109 routing and it has the dog leg, but on the JPK 1010 routing, it's just a straight line.
Yeah.
So I think our handicap might be optimal for the Wyndham and Tide in this race, to have a short as possible leg.
Yeah. Put the bow down a little bit, get the speed up, and then.
Yeah, it's really our sort of weather.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll be a bit windier. It just powers through the waves. It's quite good.
Yeah. I think our issue will be it's the 109's quite rolly when it gets so it'll be when the wind dies or when the wind drops, it'll be keeping it going, pointing to the ability, which doesn't work in 1 meter waves and 15 knots.
Yeah, I mean, what would be painful for us doing a headsail change sometime in the night, as it transitions from like above 15 to below. Just get out in the dark and be a bit lumpy, do it. Be a bit painful.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we might end up going through all 3 headsails, depending on just how windy it is in that windy patch. There's a chance we'll need our number 4 at the 20+ point.
We've only got 2 headsails, so it keeps life really simple.
You need the 4 on the 109 for those beats in 30 knots without the form stability.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
I'll see you in Alderney Yacht Club for a drink.
See you in Alderney, mate. Take care.
Yeah, bye. Oh.